For a while, the dog lay miserably on the wet ground. He became restless. He had been cooped up in the barn all day. He listened to the dairy angling cracklings. Suddenly, he heaved himself up and ran from under the willow into the swamp. The dog splashed at the edge of the swamp, playing at catching, swimming, screaming things, but his heart was not in it, and he stayed alert to tiny, soft cracklings that came to him, even in the swamp. He ran splashily along the edge of the swamp, chasing nothing and not amusing himself very much. The evening sun came out, shone flatly over the long swamp. The swamp lay in warm, misty stillness. Only the dog was noisy in a foolish, lonely water game at the edge of the swamp. Out in the swamp, a sudden evening breeze ruffled over the water. And coming out of foolishness, the dog stood looking at it. But a rustling, silky whisper came to his ears. Like the rustling of silk against paper, the dog stiffened. It was all about him, whispering, rustling up out of the moistness and stillness. The wind sprang up over the swamp, ruffled the dog's neck hairs. The dog's hackles rose. His lips curled back. Then it rose all over around him. Up from the moist and the grass and the reeds, up from the water and everywhere in the slightest whispering of thousands on thousands of silken wings. The dog was standing in the midst of tremendous hatching of dragonflies. The dragonflies rose around him. Then rose above him a strange, dense cloud of insects with the sun on their wings. The hatch lifted on the wind, sifted away towards the fringe of the swampland. And the dog, the tail hanging limp, ran out before it guarded the little hand from the strangeness. The wind died as the dog splashed over the willow tree. In a moment, willow, dog, and the hen were covered with dragonflies. The insects settled over everything. They covered the dog and his skin, and his hair ends shivered. But the little hen snapped at a dragonfly. She pushed out of the nest after more dragonflies. She dashed everywhere, gobbling and gobbling dragonflies. But a mass of dragonflies settled on the precious eggs, and the little hen rushed back to the nest, attacked the creeping, crawling things in a frenzy. A wind stirred up of the swamp, and the dragonfly mass lifted again, pushed across the field, mischievous, puzzled, and tranced. The dog watched the drum tight. Mass sifted away towards the barn and the hen house. The wind funneled the dragonflies into a space between the high barn and the hen house. And there the wind died. And there the cloud stood still. The dog ran after it, tail hanging limp in wonderment. In the barnyard, the white hens hurried up the long ramp, mistaking insect darkness for coming of night. They hurried over their sleep on the roost, but the dragonflies settled. Dragonflies blattered and messed against the walls of the hen house, slid down the walls and over the windows. The sun shone through their transparent wings on the windows, ending the brief night of chickens. The chickens pelted down from their roost. The first chicken poked her head out of the opening at the top of the ramp, gobbled her first crawling insect before her. She darted out of the opening to reach for the second dragonfly. The slaughter had begun. Behind the first hen, the flock poured out of the hen house, picked up the dragonflies, snatched them out of the air, circled, dashed everywhere in cawing greediness. Then an evening breeze came over the field, channeled itself through the deep barnyard, and as the strange cloud had come, it left. It rose higher than the barn. It sifted over the house and away towards the field across the road. The gosh chickens stood looking stupidly at each other, their crops packed and lopsided and heavy, and they were drugged with dragonflies. They listlessly moved towards the ramp, silently climbed the long ramp, and through the evening sun still shone. And though the evening sun still shone, went on their roast. Alone the dog trotted over the front of the house, stood staring across the fields everywhere, where the strange tight cloud shifted into a distance. A lone cloud drifted away over the fields to somewhere and nowhere. Whatever the wind and their new wings would lead the dragonflies, a strange darkness, a strange loneliness, sliding away in the blue sunlit evening sky.